This presentation will review concepts that need to be thought about when evaluating studies that use administrative data sets to evaluate questions in colorectal surgery. I often get asked to review these papers because of my background in clinical epidemiology and biostatistics, and I have experience using a variety of administrative data sets in my own research. I have no disclosures, except that I'm often a challenging reviewer because of my understanding of the statistical methods and because of my experience using data sets. I have a good sense of what they're good for and what they're not good for. And it's really important to think about ways that the validity of assessments made with administrative data can be threatened by the data themselves or by the way that they're analyzed. When we talk about administrative data sets, what I mean by that are published claims-based data that come from usually hospital care, but can also involve care outside the hospital, and are produced by either federal payers, private entities, or other organizations. So there are data sets from the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. There are a number of data sets from the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality that are called the Healthcare Cost and Utilization Project. These include the Nationwide Inpatient Sample and others. There are some statewide databases like the New York Sparks dataset, and there are some private payer ones like Truven or Optum that involve claims from commercial insurers. But what administrative data sets really are is just billing data. They are a list of either the charges or the payments and the claims and codes that were used to adjudicate and eventually pay a claim for care. What they're not are actually clinical data, registry data, or information entered by physicians. And it's really important to think about the difference between what is present in billing data and what would be present in clinical data. The good things about administrative data sets is that they're incredibly inclusive. They include all patients, so they're generally quite generalizable from the data set that you're looking at to the population at large. They provide the opportunity to have large sample sizes with lots of statistical power and the ability to undertake complex analyses. And the data are usually very complete. Because they're used for billing, nobody leaves anything out. This is to be contrasted with clinical data where there are often missing variables, potential for information to be not available. The downsides to administrative data sets are that they're imprecise. Because they're billing codes only, they may or may not have the clinical specificity that we need. There's often important clinical information that just isn't there, like lab data, vital signs, other assessments that we as clinicians think are very important. And most administrative data sets only involve hospitalization, though there are some that go outside the hospital as well. In evaluating any study of observational data, there are three threats to validity that I think are really important to always think about. And these are chance, confounding, and bias. And I try to think about all three of these every time I evaluate any study using observational data. Chance means how likely is it that what you found was present in your data just because of the observations you happened to make. We worry about, in particular, with large data sets, finding statistically significant differences that may or may not be clinically significant simply because of the sample size. Confounding means we see a relationship, but really the relationship is not causal. It's being driven by something else. This is a facetious slide, which is just showing the relationship between the divorce rate in Maine and the per capita consumption of margarine, which turned out to be highly correlated over a 10-year period, but certainly had nothing to do with each other, and there almost certainly was a separate explanation for that relationship. And anytime we see associations in observational data, we need to think about whether that relationship is real. Bias means there's something about our sample where the comparison that we're looking at really doesn't represent a proper comparison. For example, if you do studies using the greatest football team on earth, the Michigan Wolverines, that data may or may not be an unbiased assessment of the comparison you're actually interested in. So it's important to realize that you need to use these tools properly, and if we don't, we can end up with skewed and incorrect conclusions. So when I review administrative data papers, the first thing I think about is the data set. Did they choose the right data set? Does it represent the patients we're interested in? Does it have the information that we want? And does it have the proper assessments and measures? For example, the nationwide inpatient sample, its measure of cost is based on charges, not based on what was actually paid. And that may or may not be the information that you want. Second is the scientific question and hypothesis. And are they asking a question that can reasonably be answered with administrative data, or is it something that really requires clinical or registry or other information. The third is exposure and outcome definitions, so looking at what are the primary predictors and primary outcomes, and are they well defined, and are they well measured, are they properly assessed, do they use the right codes, and are they things that can be found reliably in administrative data. Next is the analytic approach. So were proper statistical tests used? Was there a good assessment of the opportunities for assessing causal inference? Was the modeling appropriate? Were the right variables included, etc.? Finally is the validity, and that's chance, confounding, and bias, same principles we just talked about. In the end, when we review administrative data papers, we need to be really careful that we're applying the right standards. Just because the data are available, just because the data sets are large, just because the p-values are low, doesn't mean the conclusions are necessarily correct. So in summary, we need to assess threats to validity when we look at observational studies, especially using administrative data. And the three threats are chance, confounding, and bias. Really important to think through all three of these in great detail anytime you review any of these papers.